Hello and welcome to the third update on my Voxel engine. Now I have changed a considerable amount since the last update, and it also has been quite a while. So I guess let's just go ahead and go over big changes. Biggest change is I completely redid the entire thing. I switched over from GLFW to SDL2 because it is much more robust for what I like to do. I'm no longer using SFML for anything because it was I didn't want to add another big dependency, so I'm just using STB image for image loading now. But I have to manually manage that a little bit. But yeah, so many changes. So I guess we'll just go ahead and jump right in. Let's go ahead and start it up. There has been a couple steps back in a few areas. I haven't re-implemented the terrain generation, so I had to manually iterate through these in the startup or the initialization of the scene in order to generate these voxels. These are these textures are 32 by 32, but so let's go over the first big change. Is as you can see, I've got a camera controlled by the mouse, and I've got a little ghetto crosshair there. I just used a little thing, as I was too lazy to actually make it textured. I even have a crosshair texture made, I just never bothered to actually put it on the crosshair. Anyway, so you can make and break voxels using the left and right mouse button. So if we right click, it breaks a voxel, and you'll notice that we have multiple textures now, and also multiple voxel types, because down here you can see we've got stone. So we've got these. Basically, it's all loaded into an OpenGL array texture, every texture. What you do is at the very beginning, you say the max amount of textures. I just have it as 10 right now for testing, but you could make it easily several hundred if you needed to, if you're loading lots and lots of blocks. I mean, I doubt you're ever going to really need to put it that high unless you're using some really hardcore mods. But you should be able to, probably you could even do thousands. Anyway, but you can place them with a left click, and I also made it so you can use the keyboard to select different voxel types. Another interesting thing is lighting is now technically dynamic. Currently, it just uses full bright lighting because I don't have any way to actually calculate the lighting, but it would probably be just a couple hours to implement actual lighting in here. Using just the sky and no actual light sources, that would take a little bit longer to implement light sources. But as you can see, we got this. And we can place that back there. So yeah, use space and control to go up and down, W, A, S, and D. And notice it also, the controls aren't weird anymore, it goes along this. So internally, like I said, it's using SDL2 now, and I'm also using GLM as opposed to my own math functions, because it was just getting way too tedious to write all those really big matrix functions. And yeah, and quaternions were really confusing me, because when I was making this camera, and it still has a bit of problems with this, is I was getting gimbal lock. Whenever I'd point up, it would flip around, and if I was looking the other direction, the movement would be inversed on the camera, which was bad. So that's the camera. But basically the current problem I'm having is as you look down, the camera movement gets slower and slower, and if you keep moving down, then eventually the screen will turn black. You gotta move the mouse back up, and it takes a really long time to move it all the way back up, which is bad. Also, you might have noticed that there's no longer thumping sounds in my mic. I have a ghetto shock mount now, made out of rubber bands and connects. Similar to the one in my previous video of that. You can look that up, except for it's a bit simpler and less ugly. Anyway, more internal changes. All key bindings are dynamic now. So you can change them in a configuration file, which I will show you in a moment. Other big thing is it now uses like a real scene system. So this is all in a scene. You can switch scenes. So you'd have a scene for your main menu, a scene for your game world, a scene for your pause screen, stuff like that. Currently there's no actual GUI system. I'm probably going to use CE GUI if I use anything, or roll my own. Just depends on whether I really want to deal with all the intricacies of that, although it would be a learning experience. Although I have programmed GUIs in SFML, and it was... Yeah, scroll bars are really, really, really not fun to do. I'll put it that way. You have to like recode the entire GUI system to make scroll bars function. It's ridiculous. Anyway, but yeah, big change is world rebuilding is now threaded. This took me a ridiculous amount of time. It was pretty absurd. Because the problem was on the old engine, and the reason I started recoding everything, I've never even got to that, is the old engine, it turned into spaghetti as I was implementing things, and I was getting up to threading, and I was like, oh, this is not going to work. This is exactly what I wanted to avoid. So I restarted. And I did a much better job, because that old engine, it originally started off as like a hello triangle OpenGL test. It was literally the first project I ever even used OpenGL in. And it had so many inefficiencies that I just decided it would be easier to start over. I have cleaned up a lot of the OpenGL code. I know a lot more now since I redid it. No longer deletes the buffers every time it rebuilds. It just updates the data in them. But the thing was, I had it already threaded and working in the old version, but then a bunch of stuff started breaking as I started implementing more things. So I just decided to restart it, and it was so much harder to implement it in this, and I don't know why. I think I just screwed up something along the way. I ended up having to roll back a couple commits in my Git repository in order to get it to function right. And then I just tried it again, and it worked. I don't know what I did. But anyway, let's demonstrate that config file now. But as you can see, it no longer stutters whenever you're placing voxels. You can place as many as you want. Because the rebuilding is done in a separate thread. The disadvantage of this is that it is not going to... the visual isn't updated instantly, and there's also... It could technically segfault if you double-clicked really, really, really fast. But I'm about to fix that next. This is probably going to be the next thing I do. What I'm going to do is in each chunk, you're going to get a voxel queue. If the geometry is in the middle of updating, it'll just queue the change and do it when the geometry is finished. So basically, it'll flush out the queue as soon as it's finished updating the geometry. But yeah, let's go to that config file now. I've already got it pulled up over here. So as you can see, I actually just made this entire parser and everything. The format is all mine. I hate INI because I think the closing things for the little namespaces, I guess you could call it, are kind of dumb. It's unnecessary. You just use closing brackets. Kind of like, almost like a markup language. But anyway, so just to prove to you that it works, notice that I haven't changed any source code. I can change it to 1280 by 720. Or I don't even have to recompile it. And now it's smaller because it's all loaded at runtime. It also should be faster on the recording now too. I haven't implemented an FPS counter, so I don't actually know how fast it is, but it's pretty fast. But here, hopefully you'll be able to see it a little bit better and won't lag as much. So I think it's mostly just my screen recorder that's slowing it down. But see, there's no stutter whenever you're placing voxels. But notice there is a slight delay. I don't know if you can notice or if you can see that whenever you place them. It's very slight. It's almost imperceptible. It's only 30 frames per second video, so I don't know. Oh, there's my video lag. I think that's just to do with my screen recorder, not the actual program. I did a pretty clever trick using SDL2. Basically, mouse buttons are treated as keyboard keys, and as far as bindings go, sort of like if you've ever played a Source game, a Source engine game like Team Fortress 2 or Counter-Strike, you'll know that you can bind anything you can bind to a keyboard key, you can bind to a mouse button. So, that's one of the big things that I always hated in Minecraft, is you couldn't bind anything to the mouse buttons. Always wanted to bind inventory to like one of my shoulder buttons, and with this you could. But you can just change it. So if I wanted to make, or for instance, I'm not going to change any of these right now because I don't want to mess with that. But I could change sensitivity to like 10. Write that and just run it again. And now my mouse is like really, really sensitive. It's like crazy. I'm like hardly moving it. But yeah, also that slowing down thing works whenever you're looking up too. Anyway, I think that's all for the update now. Probably in between now and the next, I'm going to start doing them a little bit farther apart, and I'm going to stop reviewing the code, because I'm going to release the engine probably under the MIT license or something like that. And I'm just going to keep the assets and scripts to myself, because this is going to be a scriptable engine. So that way, whenever I go to actually create a production game, hopefully out of this, if I feel it's good enough to sell, then at that point I can like basically keep the assets to myself to sell, but keep the engine open source, so that way I can contribute to the community, and people can mod it easier and everything. But anyway, I think that's going to be all for my recording. So hope you enjoyed the video.